Damn right it's groovy. Hey guys, how is everybody doing? And welcome back to my Evil Dead review series. If you have not seen it, I have already posted my review of the original Evil Dead. It is out now. If you have not watched it, please do yourself a favor and go ahead and watch it. But if you have not watched it and you just want to hear my thoughts on the Evil Dead 2, I will be reviewing all the Evil Dead movies leading up to the brand new Evil Dead Burn, which releases within under a week, which actually is today's Monday, actually. Life becomes confusing, and you don't know what day it is when you become busy and an adult. It's not fun. But it actually releases this week, so a little bit of correction on myself. So, and I also said it in my review, I will not be re-reviewing the Ash vs. the Evil Dead series. I don't really have time to watch a 3-season TV show right now. I got other stuff I want to do, and I also only have time to do these, and that's just what my schedule looks like. Uh, excuse me. But with that all out of the way, here are my thoughts on Evil Dead 2, which is probably still my favorite. Starting off with my positives on Evil Dead 2. Now, I think why this one is so beloved and kind of talked about more over the original is because this one actually has a bigger budget and it actually has a production company behind it. Now, the original movie was basically crowdfunded and it was basically self-funded, and it was made under half a million dollars, excuse me, and so it was not a very high profit film, but Evil Dead 2 actually has a production company and actually has a budget to actually make the movie. And part of that budget had to go to part of the effects. And to me, the effects in this movie are a lot better than the original. Now, I'm not saying the original's effects are bad by any means because they're still amazing, but I always did have an issue with some of the makeup effects and stuff like that, and with the visible blood tube, stuff like that. But in this movie, the effects and makeup are even better. Like the Deadites themselves, like the design and the makeup on them are better. Like they actually get these monstrous, like, makeup type faces. Like this one guy, I think his name is Ed. Like when he becomes a Deadite, he full on gets like a whole new face and like, demon like expression on his face. And I absolutely love that. And the effects in this movie are just better to where there's a shit ton of blood. Like I'm pretty sure there's more fake blood in this movie than there was in the other one, which the other one had a lot, but this one also has a lot more. So the effects part of the big budget kind of went towards the effects, and you can definitely tell the upgrade. And I've always thought the effects and the kind of like the look of the movie was better. So the effects in this movie are absolutely amazing and somehow tops the first one. This movie has always been known for its comedy. Now, this is kind of like the point in time in the Evil Dead franchise where they kind of lean towards goofy, campy, lean towards more comedy than horror. But what I've always really liked about Evil Dead 2 is that it really balances out the horror and the comedy. Now, there's a lot of moments where it's actually kind of freaky and scary, especially like the first couple minutes when it's basically remaking the first movie. And with the Deadites themselves, which I was talking about, I feel like the Deadites are even scarier in this one, especially with whatever, I forget her name already, but the big fat lady, the one that's played by Ted Raimi. But like she's even scary. Like the Deadites themselves are just absolutely still terrifying in this movie. But there's even moments where it's scary, and it mostly comes from Bruce Campbell, who has a lot of good physical comedy. That's basically what this movie is. It's more slapstick physical comedy than actual blurt like actually said out loud type jokes, because this movie more focuses on that slapstick stuff and the physical side. And I gotta give credit where credit's due to Bruce Campbell, because he really makes the comedy work in this movie, especially on the physical end, like the scene where like his hand becomes possessed and then he's just throwing himself around and breaking plates over his head. And I love that was actually Bruce Campbell doing his own stunts in this movie, which you could mistake it for being a stunt performer, but Bruce Campbell did his own stunts in this movie, and I have to give him credit just for that alone. And he made the physical comedy actually pretty good, like when he does a fucking cartwheel, basically, when he just pulls himself down, which is hilarious. And most of the comedy kind of comes from Ash's hand. I've always found him funny, like when he flips him off.
Son of a...
I love that part in this movie that gets a giggle out of me. And even kind of like scenes that are like kind of meant to scare you a little bit. It kind of has this like comedy like thing to it, to where you kind of have like this nervous laughter to yourself. And the first movie was really more played to scare you with its effects and its deadites, but there's a lot of stop motion in this movie, which might become an issue with some people. But it's more played to kind of make you laugh than to scare you, which it could still scare you because the stop motion effects is still pretty damn good in this movie, which kind of goes along with the effects I was talking about not too long ago. But the stop motion effects in this movie are kind of more played for laughs than to truly scare you, because in the first one they were kind of meant to scare you, but in this one it's kind of more played for laughs, which I really like. But I've always just felt like this movie has that good balance of balancing out the horror side and the comedy side of this franchise, and because you know this is like the only one where it kind of was in between, because in the other ones it's either pure horror like the first one, or it's just pure comedy like Army of Darkness, which now this franchise is kind of tend to go towards more the horror route with the 2013 one Rise and now Burn. And Ash versus the Evil Dead is basically just all comedy, because Bruce Campbell's just a dumbass in that whole show, which why we all love Ash. But this one is like the only one that perfectly balances out both without leaning towards one of the other. And when I was talking about the original Evil Dead, I talked about that I didn't really like any of the characters, and Ash wasn't even Ash at that point in the first movie. But Ash finally becomes the one that we all know him as. We know this is the Ash that we all know as that lovable asshole idiot. This now he doesn't full on become that lovable idiot just yet, because he isn't like a smart ass, or being an idiot pretty much, or being selfish. This is kind of the point where he's still kind of like becoming Ash, kind of still developing from the Deadites, where he's still freaked out and scared as to what is all going on or whatever. He still kind of has like that first movie Ash to him, to where he's scared and just trying his best to survive. But throughout the whole movie, and as the progress towards the end of the movie, he becomes that full badass. Like when he gets the courage to even cut off his own arm, and then he replaces it with a chainsaw, which is just one of the coolest fucking things ever. Which I don't think that would work, but who the fuck cares? It's fucking awesome. So this is like the point in the time where Ash is slowly starting to become that Ash character that we know him as, is that badass that we all know him as. He isn't that idiot just yet that we love, that like from Army of Darkness or Ash versus the Evil Dead, what he's kind of like known for now. But this is the point in time where he's slowly becoming that, and I like the progression from that first movie, because that first movie I talked about, he isn't really even Ash at that point, and he's just basically some guy that's heartbroken that he lost his girlfriend, and he's just trying to survive over the night. But in this one, he finally becomes Ash. Like I said, he still has those moments where he's still kind of scared and freaked out and trying to like get a grip of himself or whatever. But then he slowly starts to become that badass. Where in like, especially towards the end of the movie, that's when he full becomes Ash, like with the chainsaw hand, with the shotgun, and taking out the Deadites like they're nothing, and having his cool ass one-liners and stuff like that.
I'll swallow your soul! I'll swallow your soul!
Swallow this.
This is where Ash slowly becomes slowly starts to become the Ash that we know him as, before we fully get to Army of Darkness, and he becomes the character that we fully know him as. Something that I really enjoy about this movie on this most recent rewatch, I really like how this movie kind of makes you put it basically, in a way, it kind of puts you in the shoes of Ash, and how he slowly starts to lose his mind throughout this whole movie, with all the mind games and kind of questioning if it happened or not. Like there's a part where he's like looking in the mirror, and he's kind of like wondering, like, okay, and he tries to calm himself down, pretty much like, I'm okay, I'm okay, and then himself comes out of the mirror, and he's just like, we just killed our girlfriend with a chainsaw. Does that sound okay to you? And then it cuts to the scene, he's just strangling himself, and it kind of makes you wonder, did that even happen? And then the scene where he like falls over, and then everything, like basically the whole room just gets filled with laughing gas, because everything just starts laughing, and you as the audience, like, you're kind of just like confused and like wondering what the fuck is going on. So you're kind of just sitting there laughing with it, because you don't know what's going on. You're just like, why? What is going on here? And then there's other pretty good moments where like I can't remember what the scene is, but he like gets grabbed by someone, and he's like freaking out, and then it cuts to him just screaming in the chair, and it kind of has you wondering if that even happened. So this movie does a pretty good job of showing you the side of Ash slowly losing his mind, and kind of making you wonder what's going on, if it's and if this certain part even happened. I've always kind of liked that about the movie, but I never really noticed it until now. But it does a very good job of doing that. And then after a while, like towards the end of the movie, where Ash gets a conscious of what's going on or whatever, and then becomes the badass that we know him as. I really like how this movie kind of helps you see what Ash is seeing, and you as the audience kind of lose your mind alongside with him. But now moving on to my mixed aspects, and my first mixed aspect seems to be more of a negative when it comes to other people watching this movie. But one of my first elements of this movie is the first couple of minutes being a remake of the first movie. Now, a lot of people kind of mistaken it for trying to go for that meta like humor because this is the kind of day and age where Jason Lives had just come out, Scream came out 9 years later, so it was kind of becoming that part and like that trend in horror where a bunch of horror movies started to do this meta like humor. So I understand why a lot of people understand why it might have been that, but that is not the case of why this movie, like the first couple of minutes, are a remake. Apparently, back when this movie was first being made, this is obviously distributed by a different company because the first movie was distributed by New Line Cinema, and when this movie was coming out, New Line Cinema still held the rights to the original movie. And since this was distributed by a different company, they can't really show off much of the film. Sam Raimi and a bunch of the crew tried to get the rights from New Line Cinema because they wanted this movie to open with like a 10-minute recap of the first movie. But New Line Cinema wouldn't give it to them. They wouldn't let them use their own film, pretty much, and so it basically left it to Sam Raimi and the writers and the crew to basically open the movie being a remake of the first movie and basically going through the entirety of the first movie within 20 minutes, and that really shows. And I've never really enjoyed that about this movie. Now, for some reason, when I first reviewed this movie, I said it was a masterpiece. Well, that was when I was on my huge Evil Dead high, and I was just really excited we were getting a new Evil Dead movie after 10 years. So I take off my, Evil Dead glasses for a little bit and I see the issues. But I don't like that because it basically messes up this whole franchise to where when you watch this movie and you see the first 20 minutes of this movie being a remake of the first movie, and as a general audience, we like to do marathons of horror franchises, which that's what I do anyways. When you do a marathon of a horror franchise and then you watch The Evil Dead and then you watch Evil Dead 2 and you see the first 20 minutes being a movie that I just literally watched the night before, it kind of messes with you a little bit. And for the general audience, it kind of makes the first movie pointless. Like, who is going to want to end up watching the first movie? Like, no one's going to want to end up watching the first movie when the first 20 minutes of this movie is just a remake of it. So people are just going to put on Evil Dead 2. Now, Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi have said that if you want to have the ultra Evil Dead experience, watch the first movie and then skip the first 20 minutes of this movie. So where you would, get the scene where Ash gets attacked by the Deadeye and gets thrown through the woods, which is how the original movie ended. Sure, you could skip it, but that kind of makes more confusion because especially now with Ash versus the Evil Dead out, it basically kind of ignores a little bit of the first movie and basically only focuses on this 20-minute recap, which it kind of leaves this hole and it kind of basically leaves this gigantic black hole of an issue right here. Now, I don't really blame the movie itself because it was more of the filmmakers that they wanted to show off a recap, but they weren't able to do it, which basically put them in a huge hole. So I don't really blame them necessarily, but it does kind of create that distraction of like, well, you didn't even really need a recap of the first movie. You could have just started it. But at the same time, I guess you did want to show of Ash getting attacked by the Deadite. But whatever. That's just what I think. It's not a huge negative for me. You could just get past it, but it does kind of create an issue after a while. And my other mixed element, and this isn't really anything new that I talked about for my first review, the characters, they're nothing really noteworthy. Now, they do kind of have some more interest to them. Now, Ash, I talked about him already. This is the point where he's becoming Ash, so at least he's a saving grace of this movie. And Professor Nobi, they kind of dive into his character a little bit more in this because we kind of heard a small bit of him in that first movie. It was more over, a record player or whatever. So we didn't really learn much about him until we learned about this movie with him and his wife, Heretta or something like that. We kind of learn more about him a little bit, but at the same time, he's kind of pointless in the movie. He's just kind of there to basically. explain what the Book of the Dead is and, the Kandarian Dagger and what Deadites are. He's just there to explain to the audience what they are if you haven't seen the first movie. And then his daughter is part of this movie, which she's kind of like a little bit of a saving grace too. I've always kind of enjoyed her character because she's kind of a badass, and she could easily become a final. She could have became a final girl at the end of this movie too, which that's how much of a badass she is. And then you got like this two hillbilly couple, which they're just there to add to the body count. If I'm honest, the hillbilly dude's pretty funny. I thought he was kind of funny, and then like his fucking wife or girlfriend, his his wife's name is Bobby Joe. That's just fucking hilarious to me. Bobby Joe. Who the fuck names their kid Bobby Joe?
Bobby Joe!
And then she's like, they try to have her be like this manly like female, but she's kind of a pussy. She's a female, all right, but whatever. That's sexist, I guess, but who the fuck cares? And then there's Ed. He's like the boyfriend of Professor Nobi's daughter. Literally couldn't tell you a thing about him. Now that on this most recent rewatch, and something that I noticed about this movie, I never kind of realized how much Ash becoming a Deadite for a small bit throughout this movie kind of bothered me a little bit. Now, I do have a bigger issue with something like this similar in another Evil Dead movie, which I'll get to that when I get to that film. But Ash becoming a Deadite kind of complicates things for me. Now, one, I do think it's kind of cool to see that Ash and Bruce Campbell got to play a Deadite. I bet that was a lot of fun for Bruce Campbell to play a Deadite. I bet that was a lot of fun for him. And the makeup on him is pretty cool and all, and I do think Bruce Campbell gives a pretty good performance as a Deadite. But, you know, moving that all out of the way in just the context of the film, it doesn't really make much sense. So he gets possessed by a Deadite like two different times, and for some weird reason, the first time the Deadite leaves his body when it gets exposed to the sun.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Okay, excuse me, I didn't realize how much the sun bothered Deadites, but okay, whatever. And then the second time he gets possessed and basically gets the hillbilly dude basically killed on accident. He's basically the reason that guy gets killed. And then when he's about to kill Professor Nobi's daughter, he finds that stupid magnifying glass necklace. And for some weird reason, I guess the pain of losing his girlfriend makes the Deadite leave. Wait, what? You're meaning to tell me this whole time people that are Deadites can just, find something that hurts them emotionally and then the Deadite will leave? That's stupid. All in all, guys, Evil Dead 2 is an awesome sequel. This has always been a sequel that I even preferred, and even before I kind of joined the Evil Dead fandom and like fan pages and all that, I didn't even know this was the fan favorite. So I basically just grew up loving this movie just in general. Evil Dead 2 is an awesome follow-up to the first movie. Now, I do have an issue with the first couple minutes being a remake, but if you can even skip past that, this is just a damn good sequel. And if you are a fan of the first movie, you are definitely going to be a fan of Evil Dead 2. So what do you guys think about Evil Dead 2? Have you seen it? What do you think about it? Do you like this movie? Do you not like this movie? Do you let me know in the comments below and we shall talk about it. And if you like if you like this video, like it. If you loved it, subscribe to notifications so you will get notified for all my latest videos. And of course, until my next video, I'll see you all next time.